We've accidentally built pastoral systems around the assumption that students can already identify and explain their emotions, and the majority of them can't. And so you will hear adults telling struggling students, go and speak to someone, as if that's a process or an action that they can actually execute on and do. So in this video, I want to just spend a little bit of time exploring what's happening in this space between student and talking to someone, what some of the barriers are, what some of the hurdles are, and why they exist. So spend some time on any school site and you'll see the same pattern. Students will say, I'm fine, and they're clearly not. Another student might say something like, I'm feeling stressed, because stress is a word that is socially acceptable to say out loud, even when what's happening inside might be a completely different feeling that they can't socially name. So let's just break this part down for a moment. Stress earns its place in a student's vocabulary for a reason. So stress is acceptable to say out loud because it is effort coded. So if saying I'm stressed probably signals that you're working hard, that you care, or that you're under some kind of pressure that a teacher or a parent or a friend is going to respect rather than question. And so the same goes for words like tired or busy. They're pretty safe words because they imply commitment and not vulnerability. And so a student can say them anywhere. They can say them in a corridor, to a teacher, in front of their friends, and nothing about their social standing really changes. If you compare those words, though, to other words that don't get said nearly as often, let's say shame, for example, shame rarely gets spoken about out loud. Because if you admit that you are ashamed of something, that means admitting that you think you did something wrong. And so that's going to bring a level of judgment, maybe as well as support, but it's definitely going to be some judgment there. Jealousy, that's a feeling that gets hidden because it makes you look petty or insecure in front of others. Real, like specific anger, that often gets pushed down as well. So, not just I'm stressed anger, like anger at a particular person or a situation, that if I express that or if a student expresses that, it risks conflict, it risks creating an uncomfortable situation. Even something like sadness, so like ordinary sadness, if it isn't attached to an obvious case like a bereavement or a terminal illness, something we can like understand, that tends to get rebranded as, oh, I'm okay, or just I'm not feeling great, because unexplained sadness makes the receiver of that information feel uneasy and people pull away from it. So students learn really fast without being ever really being taught directly what feelings are currency and what feelings are liability. So stress, tiredness, busyness, spend them freely. You can say them as much as you want. But shame, jealousy, sadness, we learn to keep those to ourselves. And so if we're really getting into the weeds of what this is, it's not just a vocabulary gap on its own, it's also a social rule book. Most students follow it, even though no one has ever asked them to. And the rule book is what turns into suppression. So a student who shuts down, goes quiet, and tells you that they're fine and then gets on with their day, from the outside, yes, they might be looking like someone who's managing in that moment. And if you're in a team, a pastoral team where it's stretched and the day is really, really full, that calm looking student is never going to raise a flag. But it's worth being honest about what's actually happening underneath that calm, because it's a coping mechanism, right? Now, what's happening there in small accumulating ways is we're raising a generation of children to feel less than what they're capable of feeling, simply because feeling fully is uncomfortable or unsafe feeling. So shying away from it feels easier in that moment. So every time a student swaps a word like ashamed for I'm fine, they're not becoming more resilient, which is what we might assume from the outside. They're actually becoming less practiced at the very thing that resilience depends upon. So resilience is, can I stay present with a difficult feeling long enough to understand it? And when we avoid a difficult feeling, there is a cost. So in psychology, it's called affect labeling. So it's the simple act of putting a precise word to what you're feeling. I've linked a study down below if you're interested. But if I was to kind of synthesize it, summarize it, the process of finding the right word for a feeling isn't just a communication tool. It changes how your brain experiences the feeling in the first place. And I guarantee you would have seen this. So students who do put direct language to a hard feeling, they might say something like, I think I'm jealous of my friend's grades, for example, or I am scared to fail. Strangely, in a strange way, there is more emotional stability there because they're not just describing the emotion accurately, they're also engaging in a mechanism that reduces that emotion's power over them. It's kind of hard to explain on a broad level, but naming a feeling does not make it bigger. So if you could measure it, if I were to say, I feel vulnerable, saying that out loud now doesn't mean that I feel even more vulnerable. It does, however, make it more specific and in many cases more manageable because a feeling that you can name is one that you are more likely to then do something about or be able to do something about. So this is really important in emotional awareness or articulation or affect labeling, same things, because they are not soft skills that sit next to the real work of a school. They are the precondition for almost every pastoral system that you are trying to implement. It's step one, because you cannot regulate a feeling that you don't understand and can't name. So, from a student's perspective, we know that asking for help is really, really difficult anyway. So, if a staff member says, okay, go and speak to someone, the assumption there is that they have a level of emotional fluency and understanding that we would never assume in any other area of school. So we don't ask a student to go ahead and write a 1,000-word essay if they can't even write a sentence. But we routinely ask a 13-year-old student to self-diagnose and self-refer before we've ever taught them the difference between feeling overwhelmed and feeling afraid. And the second related problem here is that even when schools recognize this gap, and they do, the way they try to close it tends to fall in one very specific and avoidable way. In education, we know that repetition and scaffolding matter. They're essential pillars of learning. We need to teach in small steps. We need to revisit that constantly. We need to build on what came before. But strangely, when it comes to mental health and well-being, we just abandon that entire model and we rely on a one-off assembly, an awareness week, maybe a guest speaker, and then we move on as if exposure equates to understanding. And assemblies, they're going to create awareness, yes, but they do not and cannot create habit. So a 50-minute talk on anxiety might genuinely land with pretty well with the room full of students at the time or in that moment, but understanding what anxiety is and then being able to recognize it in yourself 3 weeks later under pressure in real time, they're two completely different things. One is going to be a memory and the other is a skill. And affect labeling is exactly that. It's a skill that gets sharper with repetition in the same way that any other piece of vocabulary does. So right now, schools have built systems that are really, really good at exposure and almost entirely absent of repetition. And this is where the analogy of physical health is useful because it's what most pastoral leads already thinking. Nobody expects one PE lesson to produce a fit and healthy student. We know that fitness comes from small, repeated, maybe slightly boring, disciplined sessions that are stacked over months. And no one is shocked if they go to a gym once and their body doesn't change. And we accept that physical health is a habit and not just like a one-off event. Emotional health works in exactly the same way, but we keep treating it like a one-off event. One assembly, one awareness week, one talk from an external speaker. They might be all useful things, great messages, but they're then gone. And so the intent is really good, but the structure of it guarantees that it cannot stick. So consistency beats intensity here every single time. A 30-second check-in repeated every week for a term will do more for a student's emotional vocabulary and their understanding than a single hour-long assembly, because the 30-second version is getting practiced. So it will become familiar. The student might start to expect it. They'll recognize the language after a bit of time. They might even eventually do it unprompted. And so that's what scaffolding actually means in this context. It's not a bigger event. It's actually a smaller one, but it's repeated often enough that the thing becomes normal rather than a novelty. And so in practice, this actually looks less dramatic than people expect. And that's part of the reason why it works. Nobody is being assessed. Nobody is being asked to disclose something that they don't want to share. The point isn't disclosure, the point is rehearsal. So we have to implement a framework that gives students the same small moment or the same kind of schedule. And then we repeat that a lot. And then we position that option, whatever that option is. In our case, obviously, it's our platform. It's kind of what we do. But we position it as the low stakes, easy access place to go so that when students are ready, they go there. And we need to do that until being anxious or angry or ashamed stops being a special skill that is only reserved for the counselor's office. And it starts being something that they can do for themselves in the moment they actually need it. That might be just be in a really quiet or small way. But one of the common pastoral questions is, have we told our students enough about emotional well-being? And to be honest, most schools have more than once and often pretty well. But sometimes and I might be being critical here, it's a tick box exercise, or it's something that we implement with very little structured thinking behind it. And the better question is whether students have had enough chances to practice recognizing what they actually feel often enough that it becomes a habit rather than a memory of a talk that they sat through back in year 8. And that's all I've got for today. Thanks again for listening and making it to the end.